So, today we're going to dig into a huge economic mystery, one that kind of turns the basic rules of supply and demand completely on their head. It's a puzzle that's been explored in some fascinating research by economists Atif Mian, Ludwig Straub, and Amir Sufi. And honestly, understanding it is absolutely key to making sense of the weird economy we're all living in right now. Okay, let's just jump right in. For the last 40 years, we've seen this massive surge in debt for both households and governments. Now, you'd think, basic economics 101, right? When demand for something, in this case loans, goes way up, its price should also go up. But the price of borrowing, the interest rate, has done the exact opposite. It is plummeted. So what on earth is going on here? And this chart just lays out the evidence so clearly. You can see combined government and household debt in the US has more than doubled, exploding from about 80% of GDP back in 1980 to roughly 180% today. And at the exact same time, real interest rates, that's the rate you pay after you account for inflation, have been on this steady march downward. These two lines are literally screaming in opposite directions. And that is the core of our mystery. So how do we even begin to solve this? Well, the economists we mentioned argue that to figure this out, we have to look beyond just the total amount of money in the system. We need to ask a much more fundamental question. Who is holding all the money? Their theories suggest our economy is basically split into two very different groups. And those two groups are, broadly speaking, the bottom 90% of the population, who the research calls the spenders, and the top 1%, who they call the savers. And as you can probably guess, these two groups have completely different financial habits. And here's the crucial point. It all comes down to what happens when each group gets an extra dollar. The spenders, who often live, a little closer to the financial edge, they're going to spend almost all of it right away. But the savers, they already have their needs more than covered, so they're going to save most of that extra dollar. This means a dollar isn't just a dollar. Its actual economic impact depends entirely on whose pocket it ends up in. And the difference here is it's just huge. The research shows that the savings rate of the top 1% is almost 4 times higher than the median household. 4 times. That is a massive gap in behavior, and it has these enormous ripple effects for the entire economy. Okay, so how does this all fit together? Well, this fundamental difference between spenders and savers creates a really powerful economic force that the authors have a name for, the indebted demand effect. And honestly, it explains pretty much everything we've been seeing. Indebted demand is basically what happens when the sheer weight of all this debt starts to drag the whole economy down. Think of it like this. Every single debt payment, whether it's a mortgage check or a credit card bill, it acts like a giant pump, just systematically siphoning money away from the spenders, who are the borrowers, and transferring it to the savers, who are the lenders. Let's walk through exactly how this pump works, because it's really simple but powerful. Imagine a borrower, one of our spenders, pays $100 to a lender, a saver. Okay, so to make that payment, that borrower has to cut their own spending by the full $100. That's $100 they're not spending on groceries or gas or whatever. But when the saver gets that $100, do they turn around and spend it all? Nope, we know they save most of it. So the net result is like a black hole for demand, less total spending in the economy. And this constant drag is what puts that relentless downward pressure on interest rates. All right, so we've got this economic pump that's depressing demand. But what turned it on in the first place? And why has it gotten so incredibly powerful over the last few decades? The research points to two massive economic trends that have basically put this whole system into overdrive since the 1980s. So first up, rising income inequality. As a bigger and bigger slice of the nation's income has flowed up to the top 1%, more of the country's financial resources got concentrated in the hands of savers. This created this huge glut of capital, just a giant pile of money all looking for a place to go, which naturally pushes down the price of borrowing for everyone. And this isn't just a theory, they've got the data to back it up. The researchers show that across the US, the states that saw the biggest jump in the top 1%'s share of income also saw the biggest increase in overall wealth accumulation. This is exactly what the indebted demand theory would predict. More money at the top means more savings piling up. And the second driver? Financial deregulation. Over the past few decades, a whole series of policy changes made it way easier for people to borrow money. This directly fueled the explosion in debt, and that basically cranked up the horsepower of that economic pump that transfers wealth from spenders to savers, day in and day out. Okay, so this combination of high debt and low rates, it creates a really dangerous feedback loop. It can push an entire economy into what the authors call a debt trap. And that's a place where our usual tools for fighting a recession, they just stop working like they're supposed to. I mean, think about the standard playbook for a recession. What's the very first thing central banks do? They slash interest rates. The whole goal is to make borrowing cheaper, which should, in theory, encourage people and businesses to spend more and kickstart the economy. And look, in the short term, this usually does give the economy a bit of a jolt. It works, or at least it seems to work, which is exactly why it's been the go-to policy response for decades now. But here's the trap. The so-called solution, more cheap debt, is actually just pouring fuel on the original fire. Every time we cut rates to encourage more borrowing, we add to the total mountain of debt. This makes the indebted demand effect even stronger and pushes the natural, long-term interest rate even lower. We are literally trying to solve a debt problem with more debt. And believe me, this is not some obscure academic idea. This quote from Mark Carney, the former head of the Bank of England, shows you that top policymakers are acutely aware of this mess. They know they're walking a tightrope. They can't raise rates without causing serious pain, but keeping rates super low just keeps feeding this vicious cycle. So, if the old tools are broken, how does an economy actually get out of a debt trap? Well, according to this research, the answer lies in looking at some less conventional policies that attack the root cause of the problem, this massive imbalance between the spenders and the savers. The research suggests a few possible paths, and they are definitely not your standard fare. We're talking about things like redistributive tax policies or even wealth taxes, which are designed to shift resources from the high savers back to the high spenders to directly boost demand. There's also debt forgiveness, which would lighten the load on spenders and slow down that pump. And finally, something called macroprudential regulation. It's a fancy term, but it just means stricter lending rules, like requiring bigger down payments to try and slow down how fast we pile on new debt in the first place. And all of this leaves us with one final, really provocative question that gets right to the heart of the challenge facing modern economies. If a crushing level of debt is the disease that's making our economy sick, can the cure really be a prescription for even more debt? The theory of indebted demand suggests the answer is a pretty clear no, and that should force all of us to rethink the very foundations of the economic world we live in.